I spent $43,000 on my son's wedding, not because anyone asked me to, not because it was tradition, because I loved my son more than I loved my savings account, and because I believed, stupidly, blindly, completely, that love like that gets remembered. It doesn't always get remembered. Sometimes it just gets spent. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I'm 61 years old. I run a small commercial roofing company outside of Columbus, Ohio, and I worked for 34 years building something from nothing so that the people I love would never have to worry. That's the kind of man I am, or at least, that's the kind of man I was trying to be. My son Trevor is 32. He's a good kid. Smart, kind, the type who still calls on Sundays. When he was growing up, I coached his little league team for 4 years, even though I didn't know the first thing about baseball. I learned alongside him. That's what fathers do. He met Serena at a work conference in Phoenix about 3 years ago. She flew in from Atlanta. She's sharp, well-dressed, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately figures out who's worth talking to. The first time Trevor brought her home for Thanksgiving, she complimented my living room and then said, almost as an afterthought, "It has such a cozy, older feel to it, very retro." She said it with a smile. I smiled back. I told myself she was just nervous. I should have paid more attention to the words and less attention to the smile. They got engaged in the spring of last year. Trevor called me on a Tuesday morning, voice cracking a little, said he'd proposed at a restaurant in Midtown Atlanta, and she'd said yes. I sat down in my office chair, and I'll be honest with you, I got a little emotional. I thought about the nights I worked double shifts to keep the company afloat when the market tanked. I thought about his mother, who passed 8 years ago. I thought about how she would have cried happy tears for a full 20 minutes. I told Trevor I was proud of him, and I meant every syllable. The wedding planning started almost immediately. Serena had a vision. That's the word Trevor used. She has a vision, Dad. I nodded like I understood. What I understood was that Serena knew exactly what she wanted, had known for a long time, and intended to have it regardless of what it cost or who it cost. The first meeting was at my house. Serena came with a folder, an actual printed folder with tabs. She'd already chosen a venue. A private estate outside of Savannah, Georgia. She'd already narrowed down the caterers. She had a preferred florist, a preferred photographer, a preferred band. She sat at my kitchen table and walked Trevor and me through it like a corporate presentation. I asked, as casually as I could manage, where Serena's parents were in all this. Her father, a man named Douglas, runs some kind of investment advisory firm in Charlotte. Not a poor man by any measure. Serena waved her hand. Oh, they'll contribute something for the rehearsal dinner. She moved on before I could respond. That was the first moment I felt it. That quiet, sinking sensation that this arrangement had already been decided without me, and I was only being informed of my role. But Trevor was sitting right there, looking at me with this hopeful expression, and I thought about his mother and I said, "All right, let's hear the numbers." The total estimate was $61,000. I pushed back. I said that was more than some people's annual salary. Serena adjusted the number. After some negotiation across 2 more meetings, we landed on $43,000. With Douglas picking up the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon accommodations, about $9,000 worth. On paper, it looked like a family effort. In practice, I was funding the whole production and being allowed to feel grateful about it. I wrote the first check in May. Over the following months, I was consulted on exactly 3 things: whether I preferred chicken or salmon as an entree option, whether my side of the guest list had any dietary restrictions, and whether I minded that the reception would end at 11 instead of midnight because the venue had a noise ordinance. That was the extent of my creative involvement in a $43,000 event. I paid for the venue deposit. I paid for the catering contract. I paid for the florist's retainer. I wired money when Serena sent me invoices. And yes, she sent invoices, formatted and itemized, like I was a vendor and not the groom's father. There was one afternoon in July when I drove down to Savannah to see the venue. I wanted to see what my money was building. Serena met me there with the event coordinator, a woman named Patrice. They walked me through the space, and I have to admit it was beautiful. Sweeping oak trees, Spanish moss, a white tent that looked like something out of a magazine. I stood there and I thought, Trevor's going to remember this forever. On the drive home, I called Trevor. I said, "It's going to be a gorgeous day," he said. "Thanks for doing all this, Dad. It really means a lot." I told him it meant a lot to me too. And that was the last real conversation we had about any of it before the wedding day itself. The wedding was on a Saturday in late October. I drove down to Savannah the Thursday before, checked into the hotel they'd blocked for out-of-town guests, and spent Friday at the rehearsal dinner. Douglas hosted it at a steakhouse downtown. Good food, nice wine, short speeches. He stood up and said a few words about Serena that were warm and funny. I stood up and said a few words about Trevor that I'd been drafting in my head for weeks. People applauded. Serena hugged me afterward and said, "That was sweet. I thought we were in a good place." Saturday morning, I put on the suit I'd bought specifically for this day. Charcoal gray, pocket square, the works. I looked at myself in the hotel mirror and thought, not bad for 61. I drove to the venue early because I wanted to be there, wanted to be present for the setup, wanted to feel like I was part of it. When I arrived, Patrice, the event coordinator, was directing staff. I introduced myself as the groom's father. She smiled and said, "Oh, wonderful. Let me show you to your seat." I thought she meant during the ceremony. I was wrong. She walked me to a round table near the center of the tent. Table 12, based on the little numbered card. And "You'll be right here for the reception." I looked around. I didn't recognize anyone at the table. I asked her where the family tables were. She pointed toward the front. 2 long rectangular tables, draped in ivory linen, candles running down the center, positioned directly in front of the dance floor. I asked why I wasn't there. Patrice looked a little uncomfortable. She said, "I'm just following the seating chart. You might want to speak with Serena." I found Serena near the bridal suite, about 40 minutes before the ceremony began. She was in her dress, which I'll say was genuinely stunning. Her mother was there, her bridesmaids were there, and for a moment I almost turned around because I didn't want to disrupt anything. But I needed to understand. I pulled her aside, kept my voice quiet. I said, "Serena, I think there might be a mistake with the seating. I'm showing at table 12. She looked at me. No hesitation, no surprise. Like she'd expected this conversation and had her answer ready. She said, "Table 12 is right in the middle of everything. You'll have a great view." I said, "I thought I'd be with the family," she said. "The family tables are for immediate family." She paused. Then she said, "You're here as a guest and we want you to enjoy it as a guest." I stood there for a moment. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt like a verdict. Like something had been decided about my place in their lives, and this was just the first official announcement of it. I said, "All right," and I walked away. I sat at table 12. I watched my son get married from the middle of the room. The man next turned out to be a college friend of Serena's from Georgia Tech, and he was perfectly nice, and we talked about college football for 20 minutes, and I smiled and laughed and clapped when Trevor and Serena had their first dance. I made myself be present. I made myself be happy for my son. But I was sitting at table 12, and Douglas, who had contributed $9,000 to a $52,000 wedding, was at the family table, 12 feet away from the dance floor, his wife beside him, laughing and toasting with champagne. I drove back to Columbus on Sunday. I didn't say much to anyone. When Trevor called Monday morning to say they'd gotten in safely and thank me again, I told him I was glad it was beautiful and that I loved him. I didn't say anything else. There are some things you need to sit with before you say them out loud. I sat with it for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I did some thinking about the kind of man I wanted to be going forward. Not out of bitterness, though I won't pretend there wasn't some of that, but out of clarity. Something had been made very clear to me on that Saturday in October, and I owed it to myself to actually hear it. The clarity was this. I had been generous beyond my means not because anyone appreciated it, but because I couldn't stand the thought of my son's wedding being anything less than extraordinary. That was my decision. I own it. But generosity that is taken for granted stops being generosity and starts being a resource. And I had just watched myself be classified as a resource, then seated with the other guests once the resource had been depleted. I was not going to be a resource anymore. About a month after the wedding, on a Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Serena. This was notable because Serena had never once called me directly. We'd communicated through Trevor or through her invoice emails or in person. A direct call was new. I let it ring once. Then I answered. She said hello, asked how I was doing, made maybe 45 seconds of small talk. Then she said, "So, Trevor and I have been talking, and we're going to do a trip for our actual honeymoon. We held off because of the timing, and we found this amazing resort in Bora Bora." She mentioned a price point, somewhere north of $14,000. She said, "We were hoping you might be able to help make it happen." I let a beat of silence go by. Then I said, "I'm sorry, didn't I tell you?" She said, "Tell me what?" I said, "I had a conversation with my accountant after the wedding. I've restructured some things. I'm not in a position to contribute to any additional expenses." Another silence, longer this time. She said, "Oh, we assumed you'd want to help with the honeymoon." I said, "I'm sure you did." I said it the same way you'd say it about the weather. Calm, flat, no anger, no edge. Just a statement that acknowledged the truth of what she'd just told me, without pretending the truth was acceptable. She started to say something about how the wedding had been expensive and they'd really been counting on, and I said, gently, "Serena, I wish you both a wonderful trip wherever you end up. I'm sure you'll figure it out." Then I said I had to get back to something at the office, and I ended the call. I put my phone down on my desk. I looked out the window at the parking lot of my building, the building I'd paid off 11 years ago with money I'd earned one roofing contract at a time, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt like myself again. I want to be clear about something, because I know there are people reading this who are going to say I should have cut them off completely, or confronted them at the wedding, or never paid a dime to begin with. Maybe they're right. I don't know. What I know is that my son is not a bad person. Trevor is not Serena. He's a man who loves his wife and got caught in the current of her expectations, and he didn't always know how to swim against it. That's a failure of courage, not character. I believe that. What I also know is that I was not put on this earth to fund someone else's vision of a luxury life while being seated at the guest tables of my own family. For about 2 months after that phone call, things were quiet. Trevor called less often. I figured Serena had told him about the conversation, and he was probably getting an earful about what I'd said. That was fine. I wasn't interested in managing her feelings anymore. Then one Sunday in January, Trevor showed up at my house. Unannounced. He rang the doorbell, and when I opened the door he looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. We sat down in the kitchen with coffee and he was quiet for a minute, and then he said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I let him keep going." He said, "I should have said something about the seating. I knew about it before the wedding. Serena said it was about the flow of the room, and I didn't push back, and I should have." He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "I let you pay for everything, and then I let you sit at table 12. That's not right." I looked at my son for a long moment. I thought about Little League. I thought about the Sunday calls. I thought about a Tuesday morning when his voice cracked a little because he was happy. I said, "I appreciate you saying that." He said, "I should have said it sooner." I said, "Yeah, you should have." We sat there a little longer. He told me some things about his marriage that I won't repeat here because they're his to carry, not mine to broadcast. What I'll say is that he's figuring things out. He's trying, and for now that's enough for me. He asked if I would come to Atlanta for his birthday in February. I said yes. I didn't tell him about the call with Serena. I didn't need to. He already knew. And some things don't need to be spoken out loud to be understood perfectly. Here's what I want to say to every father out there who is reading this. Maybe because you're in the middle of something similar, maybe because you can see it coming from a mile away. Your money is not a love language. Don't let anyone teach you to speak it as one. You can love your children with everything you have and still know your worth. Those two things are not in conflict. A man who loves his children doesn't need to buy his way into their lives. He shouldn't have to. When someone tells you who you are, when they show you exactly where you stand in their world, believe them the first time. Don't wait for a seating chart to confirm it. I'm 61 years old. I built a business with my hands and my word, and 34 years of showing up, even when it was hard. I sat at table 12 at my son's wedding, and I smiled and I watched him dance, and I was happy for him in the truest way I know how to be happy. And then I went home, and I restructured some things. Not just my finances. Everything.